My name is Alex Thompson, and for years I had one single goal: to buy a house of my own. Coming from a modest background, it seemed like an impossible dream, but I was determined to make it happen. Growing up, I watched my friends live in big homes, while I made do with a small apartment. But I wasn't about to let that define me. I worked long hours, sometimes even picking up extra shifts at the warehouse just to save every penny. Every month, I set aside a little more, watched my savings grow, and dreamed of the day I could finally hold the keys to my own place. And when I finally did, it felt like all my hard work had paid off. The house wasn't huge, but it was perfect for me. I couldn't believe I was standing there, in a place that was truly mine. It was more than just four walls and a roof. It was a symbol of everything I had overcome and achieved. The house wasn't just a place to live, it was my sanctuary, my pride, and a fresh start. I had barely gotten settled when an exciting opportunity came up: a 6-month business trip overseas to Dubai. It wasn't an easy decision to leave, but the pay was more than enough to help me finish off the house and give me some breathing room. Plus, I figured it was temporary. Just 6 months and I'd be back in my dream home, ready to enjoy the peace and comfort I had worked so hard for. It was a break I'd been looking forward to, a chance to recharge, and I couldn't wait to dive into this new adventure. After what felt like the longest 6 months of my life, I finally returned home from my business trip to Dubai. I had spent so much time thinking about my house and how nice it would feel to just walk through the door and relax. The thought of my cozy living room and the quiet I had worked so hard to create made me smile as I drove up the street. But as I turned the corner, I immediately noticed something was off. My yard, once overgrown and a little wild, was now perfectly manicured. The grass was cut, flower beds were neatly arranged, and there was even a new welcome mat on the porch. The house looked almost too perfect. It looked like something out of a home magazine, a stark contrast to the way I had left it. I parked my car, my heart pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I stepped out of the car, my eyes scanning the scene. The mailbox was freshly painted, and I even noticed kids' toys scattered across the yard. But I didn't have kids. I didn't even own a dog. I walked cautiously up to the front door, my steps slow and uncertain. As I reached for the handle, I heard the sound of children laughing from inside. My hand froze. This wasn't right. I pushed open the door, expecting to step into the familiar space of my home. But as soon as the door creaked open, I was hit with a wave of confusion. The living room was transformed. My old couch was gone, replaced with a sleek sectional sofa. Family photos I didn't recognize decorated the shelves. And standing in the kitchen doorway was a woman, her eyes wide as she saw me. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice thick with confusion. "I should be asking you that," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing in my house?" She looked at me, stunned, before replying, "We've been renting this place from someone named Karen." My mind raced. I didn't know any Karen. And this wasn't supposed to be happening. My mind was racing as I demanded answers from the woman standing in my kitchen. I needed to understand how this was happening. "Show me the lease," I insisted, my voice shaking with a mix of confusion and anger. She hesitated but eventually handed over a folder. I opened it and there it was, a lease agreement signed and stamped. But as I flipped through the pages, I could feel my stomach drop. The lease had Karen's name on it and it looked official. Everything seemed real, too real, but there was no way she could legally be renting out my house. I grabbed my phone and immediately called the real estate agency I had used when I bought the property. My heart sank as they confirmed what I feared. Karen wasn't listed anywhere in their records. She wasn't even remotely associated with the house. "This is a scam," I muttered to myself. My hands trembled as I pulled up the lease again and dialed the phone number listed under Karen's name. It rang twice before a woman picked up. "Hello, Karen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is the owner of the house you've been illegally renting out." There was a long pause on the other end before she answered, her tone surprisingly calm. "Look, it's not what you think," she said. "The house was empty for too long and I thought I was helping out. You weren't using it, so I decided to rent it out. I'm doing you a favor." I clenched my jaw, struggling to keep my anger in check. "You have no right to rent out my property. You're committing fraud." She sighed, clearly unfazed. "You're overreacting. Besides, I've kept the house in great condition. The neighborhood looks better because of it." I could feel my blood boil. Karen was trying to justify this, manipulating the situation like it was all in her control. But I wasn't backing down. Before I could say another word, she hung up on me. The situation was escalating. I needed to act fast. But Karen wasn't finished yet. She called the HOA and claimed that since the house had been vacant, it was her responsibility to maintain it. She even tried to make it seem like I was the one at fault for neglecting the property. The conflict was far from over. After the tense confrontation with Karen, I stepped outside, hoping to catch my breath and process everything. The situation had already spiraled out of control, but I wasn't prepared for what awaited me. As I reached the driveway, my stomach sank. My car, my only way to get around, was parked in the same spot, but something was off. I looked closer, my eyes widening in disbelief. Every tire had been slashed. The deep gashes cut through the rubber, leaving them completely useless. I could feel the anger rising in me, but underneath that, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. I had worked so hard for everything, this house, my car, my life, and now Karen was destroying it all. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about revenge, about her trying to ruin my peace just because she could. I pulled out my phone and dialed a tow truck, my hands shaking as I did so. I needed the car fixed, but the stress was unbearable. Every step seemed to make the situation worse, and I felt like I was losing control of everything I had worked so hard for. It was as if Karen was intent on turning my dream into a nightmare. The emotional toll was starting to hit me. I'd spent so many years dreaming of this house, imagining it as a safe space to come home to. But now it felt like everything was falling apart. Every corner of the house, every room now held the weight of this nightmare. The house that was supposed to be my sanctuary was now tainted, twisted by Karen's actions. I slumped against my front door, staring at my slashed tires, overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness. I had no idea where this was headed, but it was clear that Karen wasn't done. This wasn't just a bad situation, it felt like an all-out war, and I was caught in the middle of it. The damage to my car was the final straw. It was clear to me that Karen was going to keep escalating things unless I took action. I couldn't just sit around and hope things would resolve themselves. I needed to involve the authorities. I made my way to the police station, trying to keep my nerves in check. The weight of the situation was starting to feel unbearable. Karen had already proven she wasn't someone who would back down easily, and I had no idea what lengths she would go to next. But I couldn't just let her get away with this. When I finally reached the front desk, I filed the report: fraud, vandalism, trespassing. I handed over all the documents: the forged lease, the deed to my house, and photos of the car damage. The officer, Officer Mendez, looked through the papers with a professional but sympathetic expression. "We'll start investigating right away," he said. "We'll also make sure to put out a notice about the car vandalism." As I left the station, a sense of uncertainty lingered. Karen wasn't the type to be intimidated by a police report, and I knew this wasn't over. Still, I had done what I could. The next steps were out of my hands. But just hours later, she showed up again. I didn't see her at first. I was pacing the porch, replaying the events of the day, trying to figure out how to move forward. Then I heard her voice, calm and collected, like nothing had happened. "Alex," Karen said, her eyes scanning the house with that familiar smugness. "We need to talk." I turned to face her, my anger flaring up again. "What do you want now?" She crossed her arms as if this were some business negotiation. "I'm sure we can work something out. You know, I've kept your house in great condition. The neighbors love it, and I've made sure it stays nice. I'm just trying to help the community. You've been absent for so long. Why don't we make a deal?" She stepped closer, her voice dripping with manipulation. "I'll keep renting it out, and you get a cut of the rental income. You don't have to do anything. You just sit back and enjoy the profits. I'm offering you a way out of all this hassle. It's a win-win for both of us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The audacity of her. "No deal, Karen," I said, my voice firm. Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Think about it. You're not going to win this battle. It's already been months and you've got nothing. You can't just keep fighting me. We both know that." I took a step forward, my voice growing sharper. "I'm not backing down. This is my house, not yours. You've stolen from me and you're going to pay for it." She scoffed, clearly irritated. "You'll regret this, Alex," she warned, her eyes narrowing. "You've made a mistake." But I wasn't afraid anymore. "No, Karen," I shot back. "You've made the mistake. And you're going to lose." Tensions were high, both of us standing there, glaring at each other. The silence between us was thick with hostility. I refused to let her manipulate me anymore. This was my fight now, and I wasn't going to let her win. With one final icy stare, she turned and stormed off the porch, but I knew she wasn't done yet. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I had no intention of letting her have the last word. Despite my refusal to make a deal with Karen, I knew she wasn't going to give up easily. She wasn't the type to just walk away after being called out. It didn't take long for her to escalate things even further. One evening, I heard loud voices coming from the street. I peeked through the window and saw Karen standing with two other people, both strangers to me. They were all laughing and talking in a way that made the air feel heavy, like they were planning something. Suddenly, they started walking toward my house and I felt a surge of anxiety. This wasn't just Karen anymore. She had brought backup. I didn't know who these people were, but it didn't look good. As they reached my front porch, Karen gave me a smug look, and one of her companions stepped forward, a much taller man with a threatening presence. "Listen, Alex," Karen said, her voice cold and calm, "this could be so much easier if you just stop fighting me. These people are here to help me, if you know what I mean." I could feel my pulse racing. They were trying to intimidate me using sheer numbers and force. My mind raced for a moment, weighing my options. I could feel the tension building in the air. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore, it was turning into something more dangerous. But before things could go any further, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens. The flashing lights reflected off the walls of my house as police cruisers pulled up in front of the driveway. I felt a rush of relief and fear in the same moment. The officers stepped out of their vehicles, commanding and authoritative. Karen's face turned pale when she saw the police, and her companions stiffened. They clearly hadn't expected this. "What's going on here?" one of the officers demanded as they approached the group. Karen tried to explain, her words tumbling out in a frantic mess, but it was clear she was caught. Her manipulation didn't have the same power in the face of law enforcement. "Ma'am, we've had reports of fraud, vandalism, and trespassing," the officer said as he took a step toward Karen. "You're under arrest for illegally renting out this property, causing damage to it, and for threatening the homeowner." The two accomplices exchanged uneasy looks, realizing they were now part of something they couldn't talk their way out of. As they were cuffed and escorted to the police cars, Karen struggled, shouting that this wasn't fair, that I was overreacting. But it was over. The police had arrived just in time to catch them red-handed, and the situation that had turned into a nightmare for me was finally coming to an end. I stood there watching as the officers took control. My heart still pounded, but the weight of it all began to lift. I had fought for my home and now it was over. Karen's reign of manipulation and intimidation had ended. The dust had finally settled. Karen and her accomplices were arrested. The police had taken all the necessary statements, and the house was at least physically back in my control. But the victory didn't come without its cost. Standing in the doorway, I surveyed the damage. My once peaceful, welcoming home now felt like a battlefield. Broken windows, the tire slashing, and the constant intrusion had taken its toll. The repairs were going to be expensive, and the emotional scars were just as heavy. The house I had worked so hard for, that had meant so much to me, no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a place where I had been trapped in a nightmare, where I had to fight tooth and nail to protect what was rightfully mine. I knew that the physical damage could be fixed, but the emotional toll would take longer to heal. The peace I had dreamed of for so long now seemed far away. Even so, there was a sense of triumph that came with the resolution. I had stood my ground even when everything seemed to be falling apart. I had faced the worst of it, from the fraud to the threats, and I had come out on top. This experience had shown me what I was truly capable of. Sometimes life throws the hardest challenges at you, but you can't let them break you. You have to fight for what's yours even when it feels like the world is against you. As I sat down to reflect on everything that had happened, I couldn't help but wonder, was this really the end? Karen had shown how far she was willing to go, and I had no doubt she'd find a way to cause more trouble, even from behind bars. Legal battles were sure to follow, and I was prepared to face whatever came next. But for now I knew one thing, I had won the first battle. And no matter what Karen tried next, I would be ready. The house was still mine, and that was a victory I would never let anyone take away from me.